All right, so welcome everyone to the Wolf SSL live webinar, cURL, on cURL, how to make your first code contribution, presented by cURL founder and maintainer Daniel Stenberg. My name is GM Park and I will be moderating the webinar. If we go to the next slide, before we get started, I just wanted to mention that Wolf SSL will be at the 11th Annual Billington Cybersecurity Summit event on September 8th through 9th. So you can email us at fax@wolfssl.com to book a meeting and register for the event on their website. To move on to the next slide, just to note for this webinar, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box or raise your hand to be unmuted. And if you'd like to ask the question live during the Q&A session, please raise your hand and we will be hosting the Q&A session following the live presentation. The webinar will also be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation as well. And I invite you to also follow us on our Twitter at WolfSSL, as well as our other socials. Feel free to email us if you have any additional questions or comments, again at fax@wolfssl.com. And so I'd like to give a very brief company overview before we move to the more technical presentation. So Wolf SSL was founded in 2004 by Todd Auska and Larry Stefanik when they realized there wasn't an open source, dual licensed, embedded SSL library available. So at that time, OpenSSL existed, but there was definitely a demand for an alternative that was easily portable, smaller, faster, available under a more clear commercial license, was equipped with a clean and more modern API, and offered a commercial style developer support. And so Wolf SSL was really born into this market need with an OpenSSL compatibility layer. Today, Wolf SSL secures over 2 billion connections. We have more than 1,000 OEM customers and dozens of resellers. Wolf SSL is made up of nearly 40 employees in 2020, most of which are engineers. This progress is, of course, supported by our really great partner network that we're very proud of, which includes Microsoft, Azure, Broadcom, and of course, cURL, just to name a few. And so since the beginning, our engineering team has developed several embedded security products. This includes WolfCrypt with DO178 support, FIPS certification, and a FIPS-ready offering, MQTT up to the version 5 specification, SSH version 2, TPM 2.0, and a secure bootloader known as WolfBoot, as well as Java wrappers and JSSC support and commercial support for cURL. So all of these offerings are accompanied through a thorough maintenance and support plan up to the 24/7 level, and we also offer full service consulting. And so with all that being said, I'd like to really turn it over to Daniel to talk about the cURL.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. So yes, I'm Daniel. I assume most of you are already familiar with who I am, but of course, I started the cURL project in 1998, and I've been working with it since. A lot of internet transferring, and of course, open source since the beginning. 22 years and counting then. I nowadays, as mentioned already then, I work for Wolf SSL, so I do cURL support full-time these days. And I think that open source and doing things this way is a great way of doing software in the long term for stability and quality. So I wanted to let you in how we do it in cURL and how you could participate in the cURL process of ever expanding and improving cURL and libcurl, of course. So this is tonight's little agenda. It's tonight for me because I'm here in Sweden, and that's why I have this funny accent. It might not be tonight because if you're in the US, because now you're in the morning. But okay, I want to start out a little bit about the cURL community and how we communicate, how we build cURL, just briefly, what we do to test it, how we submit our changes to the project if we have a contribution we want to make, a little bit about the feedback process, how we iterate to improve things on review comments, for example, a little bit about how the merging process works or is supposed to work, and what actually ends up in a release and when we do releases, a little bit about that. So, and of course, as mentioned already, we do a Q&A in the end. So whatever you think of when I'm sitting here blabbering, I'm actually outside this lovely summer's evening here in Sweden. So if I say something you want to respond to, or if it doesn't seem right, add a question in the Q&A thing here at Zoom, and we'll get to it in the end. I'm in no hurry. We can take a lot of questions if you have any, or if I'm unclear in any way. What my presentation tonight will not include, so I won't teach you how to code. I will talk about how to provide contributions. It doesn't actually have to be code. It could be spell fixes of the documentation, but I won't tell you about code at all. We won't talk about code. It'll be implied. You know how to code, or if you don't know how to code, which is also fine, but this is not the presentation in which you will learn how to code either. And I won't mention many URLs because URLs in presentations are usually not very fun anyway. So whatever I say tonight, you can just Google them up, or you can find them on the curl website if it isn't straight clear in my presentation what it is about. And I also won't get much into what tools to use, like do you want to use Emacs or VI, or do you want to use an IDE, or which operating system is the one to use when you want to develop curl. I'm not going to make a judgment call there. You can pretty much make up your own mind and use whatever you want, as long as you follow the basic steps here. So that's just putting some of the ground rules here. So when we work on curl, or when we're all doing curl stuff. We are not alone. So doing things with curl is joining up with a pretty big community of others. So far our names of contributors, our list of names of contributors consists of more than 2,200 names. And we grow that list with roughly 200 new names per year. And those are contributors, people helping out, reporting bugs, bringing feedback well, good feedback to the project. Not necessarily writing code, but helping out, so they're contributing to the project. And we are almost 820 unique authors to the project, and those are actually people with their name to a commit in the source tree. And we're adding new ones at the rate of about 100 new names per year. So a lot of people are around this project. So even if you may feel as a sort of a big task to get code into curl or get your contribution there, you should know that a lot of others have already done this and managed the procedure. It can't be that hard, right? And while we don't have any fixed amount of maintainers in the curl project, it's not that we're not in a tight group sitting somewhere waiting. We're a loosely connected bunch of people. We're roughly 15 active maintainers, give or take, an ordinary week or month or so. Maybe we're only 5 one week and we're almost 20 the other week. People come and go a little bit. Attention goes up and down, and depending on people's lives and work habits and everything, things go up and down. So yeah, but roughly speaking, we have somewhere in the ballpark of 30 to 50 different pull requests in progress all the time sitting in GitHub. So if you go to the curl GitHub repository right now, you'll see that we have, I think it's 30 pull requests there right now, or maybe well, in that vicinity. So there is always a whole bunch of different changes in progress, or waiting to get merged, waiting to get reviewed, waiting to get attention. Maybe we're waiting for someone to update them. Maybe they're still sort of maturing in there. So you can go there and you can see that there's always this activity. Activity in curl is not, of course, just code or contributions or whatever. There's a community, there's a lot of people involved here. I mentioned 15 maintainers, but there's also a very long tail of people contributing and hanging around, participating on and off to even more irregular schedule, perhaps. So the primary place to go with questions, support, brainstorm, suggestions, ideas, debugging, roadmap, feedback, whatever, basically around curl development and libcurl and anything. You go to the curl library mailing lists and you talk there, discuss there, complain there. Old style, traditional open source mailing list. But if you have an issue, a bug, or you have a more concrete pull request or change request, then a pull request is the GitHub speak, really, to provide a patch on GitHub. So if you have more than specific issues and pull requests, you go directly to the GitHub repository and you submit it there. Well, if you want to do it even more casually. Maybe you want to hang around and chat with other curl users or curl developers who hang around in IRC all day. You go to the curl IRC channel. That is even more laid back, casual. You can talk about anything basically. We try to keep it curl oriented, but often it goes off in tangents and we talk about other things as well. That's a 24/7 channel up all the time with, I think we're, well, a whole bunch of people there on and off, going on away, coming back and talking curl and curl related stuff. And of course, if you find a security problem, or if you even just suspect a security problem, we go to the curl hacker 1 board or whatever. We keep, since you submit those sort of privately to us, and we communicate about potential security problems privately before we can confirm them being security problems or agree that they're not. So those are basically the 4 different communications channels that a contributor to curl want to be aware of. And of course, we're all nice to each other in this project. We're not nasty. We're trying to get everyone to feel welcome and be on board, and we're all friends here. We're all on the same team. We have a code of conduct, of course, that says that you should behave and be nice, and that's what we do here. Okay, so getting into the actual technical process here. So we want to land code in curl. So how do you do that? Of course, we first need to get the curl code, right? That's actually real curl code here in the background on my slide. So you can, of course, do changes to curl in many ways, but the primary way to do it is using Git and GitHub. So you start out by cloning the GitHub repository, maybe. But since we're planning to actually change code here, you're better off actually making a fork of the curl repository first into your own private account on GitHub, and then you clone that, and then you start working on changing that code. And of course, you make sure that you get the code from curl and not from anywhere else. These days, you can get curl code from a lot of different places, since a lot of different places nowadays, they package curl in different scenarios and for different purposes, and they will also host the code somewhere sometimes. And it might be tempting to get that code somewhere sometimes, but if you want to actually contribute back code to us, it's much better if you actually get the curl, the code repository, the code tarball, the cloned, the git clone from us. It'll be much easier and smoother. So, and we also encourage you to always get the latest. That's the Git master branch, so that you actually get all of the latest bug fixes or the latest crazy things we've done to the code, instead of building on something older that we might have changed or moved away from since that version. So you get the code first, and of course, when you've got the code, you want to build it, of course, right? Because that's what you do with code. And we strongly encourage you to build the unmodified version first, because if you that makes sure that your tools and the infrastructure, and you have everything set up to actually build everything without you doing any changes at all to start with. And of course, primarily we use auto tools. That's the configure way of building Unix style, Linux, Unix, BSD, or CMake, and we have a different set of Windows build systems supported by default. You could go with either of those and they will all be fine. They all have their ups and downs, but they're supported. Or if you run into any problems, you ask on the mailing list and we work it out. A lot of people have done it before, and they're all fairly well documented in the documentation tree, so you can learn how to do it. And then when you built everything, you can run make test, and it'll run all the test cases automatically that comes with curl. That's a lot of test cases. Okay, you managed to do all that. Everything runs fine. All the tests are good. And of course they should be, because you haven't modified anything yet. And of course the default code in the master branch in curl should always be fine. Curl code is written in C, and more specifically the C99, no, sorry, not 99, 89 standard, sometimes called C90 as well. That's basically the oldest form of ANSI C that you can find, which is a very old traditional, yeah. So there's no option here. If you want to contribute code to the actual product curl or libcurl, you can't avoid this, and that's a strict rule. Just deal with it. You have to, maybe you have to unlearn some habits, or you have to sort of realize what this means, but it's not a big deal. You can do it. A lot of people have done it. And of course, you need to follow the code style. So you can't just make up your own code style in curl. You have to follow, and basically you can just read the code that exists already and you see the style we're using. You have to follow that style. And if you're not following that style, someone will complain about it when you submit the code. Most likely an automatic tool that will say, you broke the style. And of course we have documentation. So if you change code or add a feature or whatever you do, chances are you also need to update the documentation. And make sure to do that, because we won't accept changes to behavior or new features that if the documentation isn't sort of updated accordingly. And of course, we also want, if you add features, if you change behaviors, if you change behaviors, you very well might need to update tests, or if you add new features, new behaviors, you need to add tests to make sure that those features actually work and work the way you have intended them to work, and that actually, when run on other platforms, they still work. So keep the code style, make sure the documentation is still correct, and check tests. And how do we test curl code? Well, one way to do it, if you do it the AutoTools way, it's like if you build on Linux, I prefer building on Linux, so therefore I show you the Linux way. You can run configure with this option, -- enable debug. It'll enable very picky compiler options for your compiler, so you will have much more warnings and picky compiler so that to not let any suspicious behavior through in the code. I think that's awesome, because and then it'll stop on it'll convert all warnings to errors. It'll stop on any suspicious thing you've done. And this is a fancy way to run the code style checker, check source we call it in curl. So if you run this, it'll scan through all the C source code in the source tree and make sure that you actually adhere to the code style. It doesn't actually check everything, but most of it. So if this says fine, you're mostly fine. And of course, you run all the tests with make tests. So when you've changed your code and your code style is fine and you can run all the tests, you're in a pretty good situation. And then you can commit and push the code. And really, 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 you want your own local branch in your Git repository. I told you earlier that you wanted to have your own fork of the curl project on GitHub, and you also want to make sure that you make your particular change now in a new branch for that particular change. And I'll explain why in a second. But branches in Git is really easy and cheap and quick, so it's not a big burden. You just create a new branch, do your change there, do everything, polish everything, commit it in that branch, nice and clean. And if you want to go for gold points, and I'm sure that a lot of people most people actually don't do this for their first changes, maybe not for the second either, but if you want to really go up there in the top quality sort of code contributors in curl, you follow the git message template. It's also documented so that we have a certain style of writing git commits, the message in the git commits. So you can at least get inspired by older ones. And then when you've done that, you commit and you push your personal branch in your personal fork to GitHub. And once you've done that, you can create a pull request to the upstream curl project then, into the curl repository in the curl organization. So this curl/curl on GitHub. So of course you submit your dedicated branch I mentioned, and you sort of request a pull from that branch into the upstream project. That is our project curl, right? And when you do that, you will get feedback, because until you get feedback, nothing happens basically. And when you get feedback, you start to amend the branch you created for this particular change to adapt to the feedback, right? So if if we start to discuss in the pull request, maybe you should have named it the option this way, maybe you should consider doing it that way. Here's a cool helper function you could use. This is how we usually do it. So you could be sure that, I mean, in order to get your change to actually land in curl, you need to listen in what people are saying. Maybe you don't agree to everything, but then you can always sort of argue your point, and we can go back and forth until we all agree that this is a change we want, we need, and in a way that we can actually merge eventually. So the PR, the pull request, will also trigger a large amount of CI jobs. That's, you know, continuous integrations jobs and tests and analysis. We're right now up to almost 90 different CI jobs that will kick off on every push to this branch now. So you created it, and now it'll start 90 different jobs, and they will all, not all, well, in most of them will build curl, test curl, and check for different things on different platforms and with different option combinations and everything. And over time, well, during the first, I mean, from the pull request, it'll take you maybe an hour to go through all of them, and you will see them pop in. Ideally, they will all turn out green in the pull request, but some of them will turn out red, and then you better investigate why they turn out red. Is it a failed test case? Did I end up with a compiler warning? Whatever. Compiler warnings are, of course, subject to get fixed by you. Test failures, probably your fault as well. Sometimes, unfortunately, we get false positives. But then if you really don't understand what happened, you can just ask, and someone will help you interpret what the heck, what does it actually mean? Why is it red? Did I do something wrong? So, and really, that kind of feedback is going to be the first feedback you get in the pull request, because the first feedback is going to pop up within minutes after your pull request is done, right? So, if you, for example, violate the code style, you will get warnings pretty quickly about, you know, too long line, you didn't have a space here, you have wrong indentation there. And those things are easy to fix, amend, and then you just push an update again. It might take a while to actually get a human response. I mean, it depends on a lot of things, right? Because not all of us are always, you know, waiting for the next pull request. Maybe we're busy doing something else. Maybe we're asleep. Maybe we're on vacation, or busy fixing a bug that is tearing my hair off. So it might take some time until you get an actual human to get you that feedback. But in the meantime, you can start working on those automated responses, because most humans won't remark on the same things that the tools already pointed out, because it's pointless, right? Since if the tools already pointed out the problem, you already have things to work on. Okay, so that is about, you know, that's the code working then, and you're amending it to fix the problems. And I just wanted to mention then there about copyright and license here, because we're talking about really 100% open source stuff here, right? Curl is licensed under an MIT-like license. So it's a very liberal license, and we don't have any contributor license or anything. You don't need to sign or agree to anything really to contribute code to our project. But we assume you have the right by your action by submitting code. So when you submit code to the project to get included, we assume that you have the right to, and you are allowed by your company or whoever you're working for at the moment or not, to contribute this code. And if you do have allowed a change, you are allowed to bring your own copyright line in code if you insist. It's rarely necessary, or it's really not important actually, because curl is open source. It will always be open source. Most copyright lines so far is actually mine. What you're not allowed to in any way is interfere with or be incompatible with the license that curl is using already. So you really must follow it. And there are actually, you need to be compatible with other licenses as well, because we want curl to be as well, curl needs to be freely licensed in a way, and possible for everyone to use in all at least open source license projects. So it shouldn't violate or be in conflict with any other popular open source license either. So I mentioned the curl CI, the building of everything kicks off almost 90 different jobs. Well, right now it's 90. It's actually a year ago we were on 45, and a year before that we were on 22. So we've actually doubled every year the last few years. So I won't guarantee that we have 180 in a year, but most likely we have more than 90 in a year. We're adding more because adding more CI builds is a way to make sure that we really maintain build quality, that we don't break anything with commits. So we do a lot of tests and sanitize and analysis and on a different range of different platforms, CPUs, and a lot of different configurations, because you can build curl with so many different ways and build combinations. So it really helps to have the CI try out a lot of things so that we don't mess up. And of course, as I mentioned before, we do have some false positives sometimes in the test suite, and that is terribly annoying. And we're working really hard to reduce the amounts of false positives and really make sure that we avoid them. But it's a never-ending game, and when we have 90 builds, you can be sure that it's actually quite rare that we have all the 90 builds without any false positives. Really unfortunate, but sure. And that's even a way for you to contribute. If you can make the CI jobs more stable, we would love you. So when you want to then fix something in a branch that you did, when you started the pull request, you just do follow-up commits to that branch, and the CI builds will restart when you commit new commits. Okay, and that's about the machines then testing. A lot of CPU power is spent then testing your pull request. And I talked about humans. It'll take a while until a human shows up in the pull request and will review your code or contribution, whatever. Doesn't have to be code, and I want to emphasize that anyone can review a pull request. It could be any random stranger on the internet showing up in the GitHub repository and providing comments on the pull request. And we really encourage anyone and everyone to do this, even though, of course, you and me know that maybe every random stranger on the internet is not exactly who you're longing to get feedback from. But you can expect that a bunch of maintainers tend to watch out for what I call their areas here within quotes, because we don't designate specific maintainers for specific areas. We're all taking care of curl combined and together. So we don't own areas. Nobody owns an area in curl, but we're all maybe have a special interest, and we're all particularly skilled or experienced in different areas. So therefore, we know that, oh, there's a code about this particular thing. Well, then I know that these guys, or that he or she happens to be very good or interested in that. And then we try to get them involved in that particular pull request. And you can be fairly sure that I will be there to review your code. That's at least how it usually works. At least if there's something I can have something to say about. There are actually some sub areas that I don't really know much about, and I will shut up about it and let someone else deal with it. But basically, if you never did a pull request before, you just have to wait for a human to show up. I mean, maybe if you have to wait for several days, I figure it's warranted to just ask, hello, is anyone there? Can someone take a look? But I don't think you have to ask that particularly often. So, okay, you submitted a pull request, someone is reviewing a lot of the CI stuff. So who decides if this is the good new feature then? We're getting a lot of pull requests and you want to add a feature. Who decides if this is a good feature? Well, I always want to, when we're adding things to curl, it has to be URL/transfer related, and or you can, unless you have a very good explanation. So if you're into this area, you're in a good position. If you're not, you're in a bad position. But of course, it's a discussion, and you can argue for why we need this in curl and why we want it this way and not another way. And there's no firm set of rules here. You can bring whatever idea you want and we can discuss it, but you may not get agreement from many others, or we can disagree within the group, of course, and then we argue back and forth and we can have a discussion. Usually it ends up with me having the final say. I very rarely actually use some kind of veto power or anything. It's basically just sort of a hierarchy. We often come to consensus that this is the way it should be. We should agree. We agree to not do it, or we agree to do it, and usually often also how to do it. And whatever we decide or agree on, we can always bring it back later on, right? So if we agreed on something years ago, and you find that a closed pull request from years ago, or maybe you find a discussion we had on the mailing list back in the 90s, it's always okay to bring that back. Well, what about now then? The situation could have changed quite a lot, you know. Things on the internet change, protocol change, people change, applications change. So maybe things are different now. Maybe we can reiterate that decision, maybe do it differently. And of course, when you do a pull request, it will sometimes burn a little bit, so you need to amend it. And you of course have your right, and I mean, this is not about code and everything. It's not always about who's right and wrong, right? It's not always just ones and zeros. You can argue, no, I think my way is better because it makes it more readable code, because it's perfectly fine to argue that. You don't have to accept anyone's comments just because they've been around in the curl project for 20 years. You may still be more correct. And generally, I suggest that if you do small changes, incremental things, do a follow-up commit, just, do it, amend it, so you more commits until everything looks fine. Then you can squash them up into a single commit maybe, or a few commits if you think that's more logical. And then sort of force push that onto the branch, talking Git terms here. Usually I want it that way, because first when I get a pull request, first I get a few hundred lines of code changed. Then I want to read those 100 lines of codes and see them. And if you add a lot of different follow-up commits, eventually it turns out really hard to see where the code is actually going. What did it actually do? Because you have one commit changing one thing, the next one changing back again, the third changed it the third way, and the 4, 5, 6 different ways. So if you change a lot, it's better to squash them up into a single commit again and submit that, because it makes it much easier for the reviewers to actually get the full picture. And of course, as I mentioned before, mech check source, an excellent way to just verify the code style so that you know that you're at least follow the code style. So when you've done that excellent pull request, all the CIs are green, the thumbs up from the reviewers, you get that, approved pull request. What happens then? Someone will merge your thing. And when it comes down to features, if you're adding something or basically changing behavior, something that we qualify as a feature that isn't a bug fix, you have to wait to the right point in time. But if you fix a bug, we can merge it at any point in the release cycle. So if you fix a bug, we can merge it as soon as everything looks fine in the PR, we merge it. But if you want to merge a feature, you have to get it merged in the feature window. Feature window being a time period in time when we accept features, which happens to be only half the release cycle. So in the beginning of the release cycle, we accept features. In the other half of the cycle, we don't accept them. So then in that case, if you submit a feature when the feature window is closed, we will just keep it waiting. It'll just sit there in GitHub and wait for the feature window to open again, so which happens after the next release. Then it opens again and we can merge it. And when someone merges the pull request, it is often me, but it doesn't have to be me. I think we're around 22 different people who can do it. Who have the powers and permission to do it. We merge it with the closest 1, 2, 3, 4 comment in the Git message, in the Git commit message, and that instruction here closes blah blah blah. It tells GitHub to close the pull request when that commit is merged. So it'll close. And bang, when it says closed by and the commit hash, you know that it's been closed because it was merged into curl master release. And bam, you can check that off as mission accomplished. You merged code into curl. Yay, you're part of that. And you know that the next PR will be much easier because the first PR to land is really hardest, and you haven't really, maybe you haven't mastered all the steps, you haven't mastered all the tools and got to know the people and everything, but the next time you know what to expect, and now you can maybe consider reviewing other pull requests, you know, fellow first-time committers like yourself, maybe a few of those that, I mean, actually, I would say a large percentage of the pull requests that are sitting at GitHub right now, they are done by first-time committers such as yourself. So we're all in the same team here, in the same boat. So you could help out there, and why not take the opportunity? So once you've actually landed your code, maybe you could go back and check the documentation. Does it actually match your experience here, or is it? Could we improve this so that we will get it even better for the next one? Because there will be a next one, right? So we have roughly, well, almost 10 new committers every month in the curl project. So there are a lot of new first-timers, and we should do our best to really help them through here because we're all in the same team. And really, everything is merged via pull requests, right? So we all do pull requests. It's not only the first-time committers or even the few-time committers. I do all my changes as pull requests. Everyone in curl makes their changes as pull requests. So you will see a lot of pull requests showing up at GitHub, and you have the chance to see them, review them, comment on them, on everything. Of course, pull requests done by more experienced maintainers and developers in curl might sit around for a shorter period of time because they show up there. The CI jobs turn out green, you get a few comments, you address them, and then you merge. So that's what's happened. So once you've done your job, you landed your things in the pull request, someone merged it into the master branch, what happens then after you've changed it? It landed sits there in the curl Git repository. It sits there in the master branch, and then the time comes from a curl release. And a curl release is done regularly. We'll try to do it, you know, schedule the release in the calendar, actually years ahead, so we know when the next release is, always every 8 weeks, except when we mess up and we change the schedule. And when we put out the curl release, we basically tag the master branch and we ship everything that exists in the master branch at the time of the release. So if you're in the master branch, you know, well, you're not in the, well, if your code is in the master branch, you know that it will be part of the next release and all future releases until we fix it or change it. So then if you're not in the master branch, possibly because your pull request hasn't been merged yet, you know that there's always another chance in the next release, or the next release, or the next release, or the next release, right? It never ends. And something that actually never really times out. It's just a matter of giving up. If you don't give up, it'll never be too late. We can just polish everything until it suits us. We can merge it, and then it'll end up in a release. And we do releases, as I said, every 8 weeks, if things goes exactly the way we want them. So smooth ride every 8 weeks. If we run into bumps, maybe we do patch releases in between. That's the sort of the ride we're doing here. So I get the question quite often, quite often then, so what should I work on if I really want to help out in the curl project? Because obviously a lot of people think they want to help out without having a good idea of what to do in the curl project, or what change should I do? What feature do you want? What patches should I work on? And my suggestions are always, look into your own use cases, maybe scratch your own itch. Is there anything in curl or libcurl for your use that you're not quite happy with, or you think it's a little bit itchy there? maybe you should improve those things first, because that's a very good motivation for yourself. Fix that spelling error in the documentation you've seen so many times. Fix that little thing that you've been annoyed with, or make sure that that little feature works exactly the way your application wants it to work, and submit a fix for that. I think that is the best way. But if you're open for going beyond that, check out existing issues in GitHub. We have a lot of bug reports filed on GitHub actually all the time, which is kind of funny, right? We've, as I said, we've been around for 22 years, so how can we have so many bugs? But there's obviously no shortage of bugs, not in our project either. So there's a lot of people having problems, and a lot of the work with issues and bugs, of course, is to figure out, is it really a bug? Understand what happens here. Did the user do something wrong? Should we rather clarify this in the documentation instead, or stuff like that? And of course, that takes a lot of human energy and power. So that's an excellent way to help out. And if not, you can go to these documents and known bugs, or the to-do documents, and they actually have in total over 200 different items listed, things that we know are buggy and faulty, we should fix sometimes, and ideas about things we should add or improve and to make the project better at some point. So there's a lot of things to do there if you really want to dive into the project. You'll never run out of ideas, or we don't really. And we really want you to succeed, because as I've said several times here, we're all on the same team. We are curl, and we don't have any, there's no opponents here, there's no other team, we're all just team curl, right? So if you run into any problems, concerns, doubts, issues, just run into a wall, I can't figure out how this works, I need help, I can't understand it, just ask. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're a community, we're a mailing list, had chat in the IRC chat, whatever, and I mean, we're many people. Chances are someone has done something similar before, or ran into the exact same problem that you're having. I would say that is likely even. And of course, we love you for helping out and being one of us. So it's your questions and problems here are not a problem, right? It'll help us, it'll help curl, it'll improve everything. So join in. It's not a problem for us that someone is having problems. And I mean, worst case or whatever, if you end up perhaps not able to do this change yourself, or you run into a problem that's just bigger than you think it was or you can handle, there's always commercial curl support, right? That's the guy head of the curl project there, and I work for Wolf SSL. We do curl commercial support every day, right? So get in touch with us, and I'm sure we can help you out really soon, quickly, and the way it's supposed to be. Just in case you're not able to do it yourself, but in most cases you really are able to do it yourself. And here are two great resources. Of course, I said I wouldn't mention any URLs, but I lied. Here are two URLs to look out for. Well, the top one here is the developer section of the curl website, basically listing a lot of developer resources and links to documentations and some automated things around curl, showing things. And below that, of course, the GitHub curl repository, where the code lives basically, and the issues and the pull requests and everything. If you just go there, you will be fine development-wise when doing things for curl. Yep, that's it, I think. That's what I wanted to manage to go through. So any questions? If you have questions, concerns, thoughts, add them in the QA thing here in Zoom, and we can get around to them.
Awesome. We actually do have, I think someone might have asked a question in the chat box instead of the Q&A box, but I can still read it out. It says, may I know the factors chosen when selecting the license for curl, especially why didn't choose, I guess why didn't you choose Apache over MIT? And so, yeah. Right,
yeah, that's actually a long separate story, but curl started out GPL licensed when I released it the first time, and then I realized that GPL license was a problem for everyone who wanted it to use it in different commercial surroundings, and then I so I backpedaled a bit and released it under MPL instead. And then I had the reverse problem, because then people with GPL had problems with MPL. And then I decided I would go to the even more liberal way of doing it with the MIT license. And and as a lot of people like to point out, we actually modified the MIT license early on. So it's actually not the exact wording of the MIT license. It's still the same spirit, but it's not the exact. So, and I didn't go with Apache, because back in that day, when I did that, Apache was still GPL incompatible. And I really didn't want a GPL incompatible license, because it would limit how we would use it. So that's why. So I went with MIT for the maximum liberal availability for everyone.
Great. And I think the second part to the question is whether curl documentation also doing via GitHub PRs markdown, and how curl documentation contributions are usually done.
Yes. Most of the curl the curl documentation, most of it exists in the Git repository as well. So yes, those are just files in the Git repository. You would just change them and submit them as pull requests as well. That's how we typically do it. There are a few exceptions to that rule, but I think those are so rare we can ignore them. I mean, the entire website is also in Git, and then there's just a separate Git repository on GitHub, so you can actually update the website as well as with pull requests. And yes, and there are some other documentation, like there's the book Everything Curl is also on Git, but it's in a separate Git. It's actually on my GitHub. So they're all GitHub repositories one way or another, basically.
The next question is, what is the most unusual use of curl you have come across?
Oh, wow. Most unusual. I mean, curl is for internet transfers, right? So it's actually not, I don't think anyone has ever used curl for anything that isn't internet transfers. But I think what is more fun is in what kind of surroundings and people are actually using internet transfers. And one of my favorite use cases, I know, that's when I collect screenshots from people when they find curl licenses on different things, and they send me photographs of, look at this device, it says it has curl. And two of my favorites, I think, is one of these is a kitchen blender, I think, which is just a kitchen device, which I think it's a blender with a tiny color screen. I think the screen is for recipes or something, and it uses curl, and I find that hilarious. And I also like that's one of my favorites. And another favorite is I think it's a Garmin watch, a smartwatch, that says that it may contain curl in it. Two of my favorites. But otherwise, of course, curl is used literally in everything that is internet connected these days.
Awesome. The next question is, always wondered about curl versus WGET. They are so similar that in principle they maybe could merge into one tool. Do you think it's realistic in this case? How about the idea of similar FOSS projects merging in general from various perspectives, technical, psychological, etc.?
Yeah. So wget actually existed before curl was created, but I didn't know about it. So when I started curl, I was looking for something like wget and didn't find it, so I started my own project. So maybe if I had found that, I would have chosen a different route in life. But and over the years, I'm good friends with most of the people, and I think I'm friends with all the different maintainers of wget through the years. So it's not that I don't know them and they don't know me, and over the years I've actually pushed them several times about switching to using libcurl for the transfers in wget, so they would just do a different front end with libcurl as a transfer provider, but they've never really been that keen to that idea, so they've never done it. And they have a slightly different angle to what the purpose of their tool compared to curl, and I think it's fine. So I don't think the tools can actually merge into one tool. I think that would be hard because we have sort of different use cases and different goals with our tools. They could use libcurl within their engine if they wanted to, but maybe it's good that they don't. It also adds to sort of, it's a diversity thing, right? So now we can use, they have a completely different implementation than we do, and we're completely separate. So I don't know, they're a separate project. There are more projects than just these two, so people do go their own ways, and we all have our different motivations why we do that. So yeah, I don't have any better answer to that.
Sounds good. The next question is, should we sync up with the master branch using rebase or merge when we update our branch? Which?
That's an excellent question, and I should have mentioned that, right? We use rebase. So we basically use a very clean linear development history in Git. So we rebase everything. So we typically rebase every PR when we merge them as well. So there are no merge commits at all, unless we do a mistake. But rebase is our friend. That's how we do it.
Great. Just waiting for a couple more questions if people have any. The next one is there a code example for using wolfSSL with curl for beginners?
Oh, yes, there are plenty. So speaking of then, wolfSSL is when you build curl with wolfSSL, you select wolfSSL as the TLS backend for curl, and the API for curl is still the same, independent of which TLS backend you use. So basically, any example you can find using curl and TLS, or like HTTPS, any of those examples will work even with the wolfSSL powered curl. So if you go to the curl website and you look for examples, you will see that we have, well, there are like 100 different standalone examples there. Not all of them will use HTTPS, not all of them will use TLS, but a lot of them will, and all of them will work just like that with wolfSSL as well as the TLS backend. So it really doesn't matter which TLS library you use. I mean, it doesn't change the API to curl. It may change a little bit of which features you can use and some of that, but from the API perspective, it's the same, and it's really convenient because you can follow the examples and read the docs, and everything is straightforward. And if you want to see more, if you want to see how I actually develop curl, I've done a bunch of different Twitch streams in the past, so you can go to my YouTube channel, Daniel Stenberg, and you can see how I do if you want to get a visual of how it actually works when I develop. And I've done a bunch of them, and I do them regularly, so I will do more in the future too if you're interested in that. Anyway, this seems that we don't have any more questions.
Yeah, but if you do, in any later time, feel free to, email us at facts@wolfSSL, and yeah, feel free to, have any comments or feedback on the webinar as well. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and a special thanks to Daniel for leading us on today's topic. Again, the webinar was recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation. Again, I invite you to follow us on Twitter at wolfSSL, as well as our other socials. And thank you so much for coming, and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.